The fabric of the tent screams, a violent rip echoing through the sub-zero night. Inside, a frantic chaos. Boots discarded in haste lie scattered on the frozen ground cloth. Sleeping bags, unzipped, lie empty, still bearing the indentations of bodies that moments ago sought warmth within their downy embrace. A half-eaten meal, a flask of vodka, all abandoned. The air is thick with a primal terror, a silent scream that permeates the icy canvas. Outside, the blizzard rages, a blinding, howling vortex of snow and wind. And through it, 9 figures, stumbling, desperate, flee into the impossible white void, not dressed for the degrees C reality, some barefoot, some in socks. They're running, but from what? The mountain offers no sanctuary, only a deeper, colder embrace. The tracks in the snow, faint and quickly swallowed by the fresh fall, tell a story of sheer panic, of an immediate, overwhelming threat that drove them from the relative safety of their shelter, forcing them into a struggle for survival against an unseen, unspeakable horror. This wasn't a planned retreat, it was an escape from something inside, something that tore through the fabric of their reality as violently as they tore through their tent. What could possibly drive 9 experienced, hardened trekkers to such a desperate, suicidal flight into the freezing darkness? But to understand how we got here, how 9 lives were violently reaped on a desolate mountain slope, we need to go back. Back to a time when these 9 individuals were alive, vibrant, filled with the simple joys and grand ambitions of youth in Soviet Russia. It was January 1959. Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old radio engineering student at the Ural Polytechnic Institute, was not just a leader. He was an innovator, known for his meticulous planning and his passion for the great outdoors. His team comprised 8 other students and graduates, all highly skilled and experienced skiers and mountaineers. There was Zinaida Kolmogorova, 22, a spirited and resilient student known for her leadership qualities and unwavering optimism. Ludmila Dubinina, 21, a quiet but determined trekker with a keen intellect. Alexander Kolvatov, 24, a gentle giant, pragmatic and strong. Rustam Slobodin, 23, a gifted athlete with a quick wit. Georgy Krivonishenko, 23, and Yuri Doroshenko, 21, were close friends, known for their humor and resourcefulness. Nikolai Thibox-Brignoles, 23, was a keen photographer and an intelligent engineer. Semyon Zolotaryov, a 37-year-old military veteran and ski instructor, brought invaluable experience to the group, a late addition who offered a different perspective. And finally, Yuri Yudin, 21, the 10th member who would, by a cruel twist of fate, be the sole survivor spared by illness. They were a cohesive unit, excited by the challenge, eager to conquer the majestic, yet unforgiving, northern Ural Mountains, brimming with life and dreams. They had no idea the landscape would soon become their tomb, etched into history as the scene of an impossible tragedy. The setting for this unfolding horror was the Soviet Union in 1959, a country still deeply scarred by World War II, yet brimming with Cold War ambition and a fervent nationalistic spirit. It was an era of rapid industrialization and scientific advancement, where the vast, untamed wilderness of Russia represented both a challenge to be conquered and a symbol of national strength. The northern Urals, a rugged and sparsely populated mountain range, was a popular, albeit challenging, destination for adventurous Komsomol youth groups, the all-Union Leninist Young Communist Leg, who were encouraged to embrace physical endurance and exploration. Dyatlov's expedition, a Category III trek, was considered one of the most arduous and prestigious, a testament to the group's elite skills. Their journey began on January 23, 1959, from the city of Sverdlovsk, now Yekaterinburg. They traveled by train, then by truck, reaching the settlement of Vizhay, the last inhabited outpost, on January 25th. From there they embarked on their final leg, skiing towards Otort Mountain, a local Mansi name meaning "don't go there," a chilling prophecy they unknowingly embraced. The Soviet government, keen to project an image of a strong, capable nation, often downplayed or outright suppressed information that could be perceived as weakness or failure. This societal backdrop would become crucial in the aftermath of what transpired on the slopes of Khalat Siakl, or Dead Mountain, another ominous Mansi name. The official narrative, when it eventually emerged, would be shaped by this overarching desire for control, leaving many questions deliberately unanswered and an enduring shadow over the incident. The initial days of the trek were challenging but unremarkable for a group of this caliber. They navigated through forests, crossed frozen rivers, and steadily gained altitude. However, on January 31st, a subtle error began to unfold, a small miscalculation that would later be seen as the first thread unraveling their fate. The team had set up a supply depot in the upper reaches of the Ospia River, a standard procedure to lighten their loads for the ascent. The next day, February 1st, they intended to cross a mountain saddle and establish a camp on the opposite side, on the eastern slope of Mount Otterton. But either due to worsening visibility from an approaching storm or a simple navigational lapse, they veered west towards the summit of Khalat Siakl, the Dead Mountain, rather than the saddle leading to Otterton. They ended up roughly 1.5 kilometers too far west, on an exposed ridge. This deviation meant they were now on the open, windswept slope of Khalat Siakl, directly in the path of any incoming weather, rather than the more sheltered forest below or the saddle itself. They were above the tree line, utterly exposed. Dyatlov, despite his meticulous planning, made the fateful decision to set up camp there at approximately 5 p.m., rather than descending a mere 1.5 kilometers to the relative safety of the Khalat Siakl forest. It was a choice that baffled later investigators. Perhaps they were exhausted, perhaps the visibility was too poor to easily find a better spot, or perhaps they felt confident in their ability to withstand the elements. Whatever the reason, this seemingly minor navigational error, followed by the decision to camp on the exposed slope, unknowingly sealed their grim destiny, setting the stage for the unimaginable terror that would soon engulf them. The decision to camp on the exposed slope of Khalat Siakl on February 1st was the critical juncture. The wind howled, relentlessly tearing at anything not firmly anchored. Despite the brutal conditions, Dyatlov's team meticulously dug a platform in the snow, anchoring their large, 10-person tent into the hard-packed surface. They understood the dangers of the mountain. They were experienced, but something utterly unexpected, something beyond their considerable expertise, was about to unfold. Inside the tent, the air would have been a relative haven, perhaps even warm from their shared body heat and a small improvised stove. They had eaten, as evidenced by the food remains found later. They had prepared for sleep, removing outer layers, some settling into their sleeping bags. The last entry in their collective diary, made by Zinaida Kolmogorova, mentions the wind and the cold, but nothing more alarming than typical mountain discomfort. The hikers were in various states of undress, suggesting they were preparing for bed when whatever transpired began. One of the most stomach-dropping details is the way the tent was ultimately found. It wasn't destroyed by an external force or buried by an avalanche in a manner that would collapse it uniformly. Instead, it bore multiple deliberate slashes, originating from the asterisk inside asterisk. Imagine the scene: 9 individuals, some already in their sleeping bags, others just taking off their boots, suddenly confronted by a threat so immediate, so terrifying, that their only option, their only perceived chance for survival, was to violently cut their way out of their own shelter. They didn't even have time to retrieve their boots, warm clothing, or vital equipment. This wasn't a slow, creeping cold that forced them to abandon camp. It was an explosive, instantaneous panic that drove them into the brutal, degrees C blizzard, underdressed and unprepared for anything but sheer flight. What could possibly have instilled such immediate, paralyzing fear that they abandoned all logic, all equipment, and fled into the certain death of the frozen night? When the Dyatlov group failed to return by their scheduled date of February 12th, or even by February 20th, a search party was organized. Initially, it comprised volunteers from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, including students and instructors, led by Mikhail Sharavin. Later, the military and the state-controlled MVD, Ministry of Internal Affairs, joined, bringing professional expertise and resources. On February 26th, the search party, spearheaded by Boris Slobtsov and Mikhail Sharavin, finally located the abandoned tent. What they found immediately raised alarm and instilled a deep sense of dread. The tent was partially collapsed, buried under snow, but its most striking feature was the series of large, deliberate cuts in the canvas, clearly made from the inside. Inside, personal belongings were scattered, including cameras, diaries, and crucially, all their outer clothing and boots. It suggested a rapid, desperate exodus. Adding to the mystery, a trail of footprints, some barefoot, some in socks, some in single boots, led downhill from the tent towards a nearby forest. But the footprints didn't suggest a panicked scramble of people fleeing in different directions. They suggested a more orderly, albeit desperate, descent of a group, walking together in a single file despite the extreme conditions. This detail alone profoundly complicated any simple explanation. Why would experienced hikers, facing a blizzard and extreme cold, abandon their warm clothing and boots, cut their way out of their tent, and then calmly walk away in single file? Furthermore, the tent itself, though damaged, was not collapsed by the force of an avalanche. Its poles were still standing, and many of its contents were undisturbed. It was a scene of intentional abandonment, not a natural disaster. The initial shock gave way to profound confusion, setting the stage for an investigation that would uncover far more unsettling truths than anyone could have anticipated. Something undeniably didn't add up. Everything about the initial discovery pointed towards an immediate, catastrophic event. The cut tent, the abandoned gear, the hurried footprints leading away, it all screamed of an urgent escape from a present danger. One might assume a struggle, an animal attack, or perhaps a sudden avalanche. But then the evidence from the tent itself began to contradict these easy assumptions, flipping the entire narrative on its head. If an animal had attacked, there would have been signs of a struggle within the tent, claw marks, blood. There were none. The tent, though slashed, was not torn apart from the outside. If an avalanche had hit, it would have flattened the tent, scattering its contents violently. Instead, investigators found an orderly array of personal belongings. Boots were neatly lined up against the tent wall, untouched food rations lay ready for consumption, and even a camera was found tucked inside a sleeping bag. The scene was not one of devastation, but of intentional, though incredibly rapid, abandonment. The hikers had left behind their most crucial survival gear, their winter boots, their warm coats, even their ice axes and shovels. They had fled into a blizzard at temperatures around degrees C, dressed in varying degrees of underwear, socks, and light clothing. This paradoxical abandonment of essential gear in such extreme conditions was the first major but moment. Why would experienced trekkers trained in survival make such an illogical decision unless the threat they faced was so overwhelming, so immediate, that the perceived danger of staying outweighed the certain death of venturing out unprepared? The situation suggested a fear far more profound than the elements, a terror that stripped them of their rationale. The truth, when it finally began to surface, was far more disturbing than a simple natural disaster. As the search expanded, the grim reality began to truly emerge. The footprints from the tent led downhill for about 500 meters to the edge of a dense pine forest, a slight reprieve from the exposed slope. There, under a large cedar tree, the first two bodies were found on February 27th, Yuri Doroshenko and Georgy Krivonishenko. They were both barefoot, dressed only in underwear, and showed signs of hypothermia. Curiously, the cedar tree's lower branches were broken, suggesting someone had climbed it, perhaps to scan for something or to escape. A small fire, just embers, was found nearby, indicating a desperate, futile attempt at warmth. This alone raised questions. Why were they so underdressed, so far from the tent, and why climb a tree? Over the next few days, 3 more bodies were discovered between the cedar tree and the tent: Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kolmogorova, and Rustam Slobodin. All showed signs of hypothermia. Dyatlov was found with one boot on, lying as if trying to crawl back towards the tent. Kolmogorova had sustained bruises and abrasions, possibly from a struggle or fall. Slobodin, however, presented a chilling detail: a crack in his skull, approximately 17 cm long, but with no external wound. It was a fracture from a blunt force trauma, yet his skin was unbroken. This internal injury without external mark was a horrifying harbinger of what was to come, challenging any simple explanation of death by exposure. The discovery of these 5, while tragic, only deepened the enigma. They had died from hypothermia, but the circumstances of their flight, their underdressed state, and Slobodin's strange injury pointed to a terror far beyond the biting cold. The remaining 4 hikers, however, would present an even more grotesque and inexplicable set of facts, pushing the incident into the realm of the truly macabre. Something was very, very wrong on Dead Mountain. The initial 5 bodies presented a puzzle of hypothermia and perplexing injuries. But the discovery of the final 4, found nearly 3 months later in May, buried under 4 meters of snow in a ravine approximately 75 meters from the cedar tree, unveiled a new, far more disturbing chapter of the Dyatlov Pass incident. These were Ludmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolvatov, Nikolai Thiboksbrignoles, and Semyon Zolotaryov. Their deaths were not merely from exposure. Their injuries defied belief. Nikolai Thiboksbrignoles, 23, the photographer, had a massive skull fracture. Alexander Kolvatov, 24, had multiple broken ribs. Semyon Zolotaryov, 37, the veteran, also suffered massive chest trauma, including broken ribs. But it was Ludmila Dubinina, 21, whose fate was arguably the most horrifying. She was found kneeling, face down, in a stream bed, as if she had been trying to drink or was simply overcome. Her most shocking injury was the absence of her tongue, eyes, parts of her lips, and a piece of facial tissue. These had been removed with a precision that baffled investigators. The official conclusion stated that soft tissues of her head were eaten away after death by small animals or insects, a statement that failed to convince many, given the freezing conditions that would inhibit such activity. Furthermore, all 4 were much better dressed than the first 5, some wearing clothes stripped from the initial victims. Dubinina was wearing Krivonishenko's trousers and hat. Zolotaryov was wearing Dubinina's faux fur coat and hat. This desperate act of scavenging clothes suggested a prolonged struggle for survival, a grim redistribution of warmth in the face of certain death. The sheer brutality of their injuries, particularly Dubinina's mutilation and the blunt force trauma without external wounds on several others, transformed a tragic hiking accident into an unfathomable nightmare. It made the compelling unknown force mentioned in the official report feel less like an evasive statement and more like an admission of absolute bewilderment. The gruesome discoveries and inexplicable injuries quickly led to the closure of the official investigation. The prosecuting officer, Lev Ivanov, ultimately concluded that the hikers died due to a compelling unknown force, a phrase that has since become synonymous with the enduring mystery of Dyatlov Pass. Crucially, the case files were declared classified and sent to a secret archive, only to be partially declassified in the 1990s, decades later. This immediate, swift suppression of information ignited decades of suspicion regarding a state-level cover-up. Why classify a simple hiking accident? The Soviet regime had a history of tightly controlling information, particularly anything that could be perceived as a failure of the state or a threat to national morale. The idea that a group of experienced, Komsomol-affiliated hikers could die in such a bizarre and violent manner was simply not something the Soviet Union wanted widely known. Who benefited from this silence? Primarily the state itself, which maintained its carefully constructed image of an orderly, secure society where such inexplicable tragedies simply didn't occur. The classification prevented widespread public inquiry, stifled independent investigation, and ensured that the official narrative, however vague, remained unchallenged. Rumors, however, persisted and flourished in the vacuum of information. Tales of strange lights in the sky, recounted by local Mansi people and even other trekking groups in the area, were dismissed. Allegations of military involvement, secret weapon testing, or encounters with undiscovered creatures were suppressed. The families of the victims were left with incomplete answers and an enduring sense of injustice. The rapid closure of the case, the official vagueness, and the subsequent classification of the files didn't quell the questions. They merely forced them underground, transforming a tragic incident into one of the 20th century's most enduring and unsettling cold cases, fueling a persistent search for the truth hidden beneath layers of snow and state secrecy. Despite the official closure and classification of the Dyatlov Pass case, the mystery refused to die. Decades later, with the fall of the Soviet Union and the gradual declassification of some files in the 1990s, independent researchers, scientists, and journalists began to meticulously re-examine the evidence. What emerged from these renewed investigations was a trove of baffling details, previously overlooked or downplayed. One significant revelation was the presence of radiation on some of the victims' clothing. Traces of alpha and beta radiation were found on the clothes of Krivonyshenko and Kolmogorova, prompting theories of military involvement or a nuclear accident. While the levels were not immediately lethal, their presence was undeniably unusual for a remote hiking expedition. Furthermore, testimonies from other trekking groups operating in the same region around the same time reported seeing strange, orange spheres or fireballs in the night sky. These accounts, initially dismissed as hallucinations or weather phenomena, took on new significance in light of the official, unknown compelling force. Another crucial detail was the state of the pine trees near the cedar tree where Doroshenko and Krivonyshenko were found. Some trees were scorched, yet there was no evidence of a large fire. It was a precise, localized burn pattern, suggesting an unusual heat source. The declassified files also revealed that the initial investigation focused almost exclusively on a criminal angle, examining the possibility of an attack by local Mansi tribesmen or escaped Gulag prisoners, theories quickly disproven by the lack of any struggle, missing valuables, or signs of other human presence. The sustained interest in the case, fueled by the inconsistencies and the sheer brutality of the deaths, highlighted the inadequacy of the initial investigation. It became clear that the official narrative was less about truth and more about control, paving the way for a deeper, more rigorous inquiry into what truly happened that terrifying night. In the decades since the Dyatlov Pass incident, numerous theories have been proposed, attempting to rationalize the impossible. Many of these, however, quickly fall apart under closer scrutiny. The official conclusion of hypothermia and the vague, compelling unknown force is the first to unravel. While hypothermia certainly claimed lives, it doesn't explain the immediate panicked flight from the tent, the cut from inside, or the severe, internal blunt force trauma sustained by several victims. If it were merely the cold, they would have donned their clothes. Another common theory pointed to an avalanche. However, a significant avalanche would have flattened the tent, buried it entirely, and left vast fields of debris. The tent, though damaged, was still partially standing, its contents mostly undisturbed, and crucially, there was no evidence of an avalanche path or snow mass consistent with such an event near the tent location. The slope was too gentle, and the snowpack not unstable enough for a spontaneous slab avalanche of that destructive power. An attack by the indigenous Mansi people was also quickly dismissed. The Mansi respected the mountain and its spirits. They had no history of violence against trekkers. Furthermore, there were no tracks other than the hikers, no signs of a struggle, and no valuables were taken. The Yeti or snowman theory, while sensational, lacks any credible evidence. Animal attacks, such as by bears or wolves, were also considered, but these animals typically leave distinct tracks, maul victims externally, and often drag away bodies. None of these were present. The lack of blood at the scene of the initial 5 bodies further argues against a violent animal encounter. Each of these logical explanations, while attempting to bring order to the chaos, ultimately fails to account for the full spectrum of evidence. The precise cuts in the tent, the varying states of undress, the internal injuries without external wounds, the missing tongues and eyes, and the radiation. The persistence of these unanswered questions points to a truth far more complex and terrifying than any simple, conventional disaster. While no single theory perfectly explains every single anomaly, the most scientifically credible and widely accepted explanation among experts today involves a rare combination of natural phenomena, a delayed slab avalanche coupled with infrasound. This theory, extensively researched by Swiss avalanche expert Johann Gaume and Dr. Alexander Puzrin, suggests that the hikers, by cutting into the snow to create their tent platform, destabilized an underlying layer of snow. A strong katabatic wind, blowing down the mountain slope in the early hours of February 2nd, then created a pressure differential that caused a slab of snow to release just above their tent. This wasn't a massive, destructive avalanche that flattened everything, but rather a smaller, denser slab that slid down, burying parts of the tent and potentially injuring some of the occupants, particularly those whose heads were near the slope side of the tent. Crucially, this slab avalanche would have been a delayed event, triggered not by fresh snowfall, but by the wind-driven stress on an already compromised snowpack. The immediate threat of being buried alive would have caused the panicked flight, forcing them to cut their way out of the tent rather than fumbling with zippers. The internal injuries, like those on Thiboksburg Knolls and Zolotaryov, could be consistent with being crushed by heavy snow. Complementing this, the infrasound hypothesis posits that the specific topography of Khalat Syakhl, combined with powerful winds, could have generated low-frequency sound waves, inaudible to the human ear but capable of inducing extreme anxiety, fear, disorientation, and even physical discomfort, nausea, chest pains. This infrasound could have intensified their panic, leading to irrational behavior like paradoxical undressing, where hypothermic individuals feel a burning sensation and remove their clothes. This combined scenario, a localized, relatively small but terrifying slab avalanche, amplified by the psychological torment of infrasound, provides the most cohesive explanation for the panicked escape, the injuries, and the subsequent deaths by hypothermia. It doesn't, however, fully explain every single macabre detail, leaving fragments of the enigma tantalizingly out of reach, but it offers the closest framework for understanding the impossible. Yet even this theory struggles with the most disturbing details. Even with the most credible scientific theories, one fact remains, a chilling detail that continues to haunt every attempt at a rational explanation, solidifying the Dyatlov Pass incident as an enduring monument to the truly macabre. It is the discovery of Ludmila Dubinina's body. Her eyes were missing. Her tongue was gone. Parts of her lips and facial tissue had been removed, leaving a grotesque, gaping void. While some initial reports claimed animal scavenging, forensic experts and later re-examinations found this highly improbable in the extreme cold and preserved conditions. The precise nature of the removal, almost surgical in its clean edges in some areas, suggested something far more sinister than an opportunistic scavenger. Coupled with the fact that Alexander Kolvatov also had missing eyeballs and part of his nose, and Semyon Zolotaryov had missing eyeballs and a fractured skull. These were not the random, tearing injuries of animals, they were specific, targeted mutilations. Imagine the absolute, unimaginable terror that must have gripped these individuals in their final moments. To survive the initial flight, the crushing snow, the mind-bending infrasound, only to face such a horrific end. It implies a conscious, deliberate act or a force so precise and brutal that it defies categorization. Was it a posthumous act, or did these injuries occur while they were still alive? The thought alone plunges the entire incident into a realm of pure, unadulterated horror. The compelling unknown force suddenly takes on a visceral, tangible form, leaving a void not just in Ludmila's face, but in the annals of forensic science and human understanding. This single, unspeakable detail ensures that the Dyatlov Pass incident will forever remain less a solved mystery, and more a testament to the dark, unfathomable possibilities that lurk in the desolate corners of our world, a chilling reminder that some truths may simply be too horrifying to fully comprehend, leaving us with a lingering, unsettling question about the true nature of their terror. The Dyatlov Pass incident stands as a chilling testament to the fragility of human life in the face of the unknown, and the enduring power of a mystery that resists easy answers. It's a story that challenges our understanding of logic, survival, and the limits of scientific explanation. For over 6 decades, it has captivated researchers, ignited countless theories, and fueled a persistent, unsettling fascination across the globe. What happened on the slopes of Khalat Syakhl that night may never be fully, definitively understood. Was it a rare convergence of natural forces, a localized slab avalanche combined with the disorienting effects of infrasound, driving experienced hikers into a state of irrational panic and ultimately to their deaths? Or was it something far more sinister, a secret military experiment gone awry, an encounter with an unknown entity, or a phenomenon beyond our current comprehension? The fragments of evidence, the cut tent, the organized departure, the extreme hypothermia, the blunt force traumas, the internal injuries without external marks, the radiation, and most disturbingly, the precise mutilations of Ludmila Dubinina and others, collectively paint a picture of an event so extraordinary, so terrifying, that it defies a single, comfortable narrative. It forces us to confront the terrifying possibility that sometimes the world holds secrets too profound, too brutal, to be easily unearthed. The Dyatlov Pass incident reminds us that even with all our advancements, the wilderness, and indeed, the very fabric of reality, can harbor an unknown compelling force that challenges the very core of our understanding, leaving behind only questions and an enduring sense of dread. If this kept you up at night, subscribe. We post dark history every week.